do.
Is that okay if I record the meeting?
Of course.
Sure.
And I want to say hi to Bill and to Jeff. So hi, guys. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Shutler. And Nancy asked that I start by giving a little bit of context. And what I'd like to do, Nancy, if possible, is to have you share your screen. And then I'm going to put together a short little slideshow. I do have a hard stop at 6:25. I have a class at 6:30, but I'm happy to answer as many questions and whatever experience I have, which really isn't all that much, I'm happy to share. So
I think you can just share it yourself. Can you?
Okay, let's see.
Okay.
Yep, here we go. So you tell me if you can see it. You can.
Yeah.
Yep, let's start from the beginning. And let me put it into slideshow format. I should be able to figure this out. There we go. So this is really the experience of our working group, the Climate and Clean Energy Working Group of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. And just by way of background, again, setting this context, we didn't form until January of 2020. And we really were formed in part by instigation of Sam Rasool, who basically said it's time for the Grassroots Coalition to get involved in legislation. He kind of insisted we had a press conference. I don't think we would have really moved so quickly down the legislative track had Sam really not pushed us. And it became clear I needed to form a working group. And what we did in 2020 is we developed some loose criteria for which bills we were going to select, because there are lots of climate bills. Everybody wants to put forward some kind of climate clean energy bill, and it's dizzying. And so we really had to figure out a way to narrow our focus, because while my group is a little bigger than this, we are not a big group. We honed in on one of the key bills, which was the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And this was the bill that was going to force Dominion and APCO to produce more clean energy. I have that in quotes for a reason. You'll hear more about that. There was a larger effort. There is always a larger effort. In this way, we're very lucky because there is the Virginia Conservation Network, and the Virginia Conservation Network is made up of the powerhouse groups: Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, Virginia, let's see, League of Conservation Voters for Virginia, Nature Conservancy, as well as smaller groups like the James River Keepers, etc. But it's a big group, it's an influential group, and they meet regularly and have working groups. The Conservation Network formed, or I should say several people in the Conservation Network formed an elite lobby team. And they honed in on just one or two key bills, really, and it was the Virginia Clean Economy Act, that they were going to push with all their heart and soul. And they were going to let everything else go by the wayside, because they realized to get something like the Virginia Clean Economy Act through, it would take an amazing amount of focus, and they could not allow themselves to be sidetracked by other bills, however worthy. What we did at that time, since we were just getting off the ground and I wasn't even active with the Virginia Conservation Network, is we were monitoring bills, and we honed in on the Virginia Clean Economy Act too, because I knew this was going to be a big deal bill. I'm also on the Sierra Club Legislative Committee, which is also part of the Virginia Conservation Network and also part of the LEAT team. And so we monitored this bill closely. And because I'm an environmental attorney, I was able to do really deep dives on the substantive aspects of this bill, which was 70 pages of horrible utility law. And we would email legislators sometimes daily on substantive changes that we felt were really going off track. So the Virginia Clean Economy Act did pass, and that's a big yay, but it was a highly flawed bill, which was a big boo. And the takeaway is that notwithstanding the elite lobby team, Dominion and APCO still held all the cards. What happened is Dick Saslaw and the powers that be basically said to this lobby team, this elite team, go work it out with Dominion and APCO and let us know how it comes out. So they basically abdicate their legislative authority
Yeah.
and basically put it on these public interest nonprofits to figure out how to do battle with basically the Goliaths. So at any rate, they hold the cards. Why do they hold the cards? Because in the end, any bill that gets passed has to get passed through the key committees first. And in our case, it's Senate Commerce and Labor, which is where all good climate and clean energy bills typically go to die.
Right.
And I'm going to come back this time and again, because you have your own committee, privileges and elections. You might have appropriations too, which is its own set of issues. But I want to focus on who votes against the bill, who votes against our bills, which is Barker, Lucas, Marsden, Sassaw, Spruill. I got Marsden again, Mason, and sometimes Surville. And Nancy is absolutely right. Marsden and Barker are the nicest guys in the world, but they are wily like foxes. They are just really, challenge. So again, the elite team, as I mentioned, so now we're going to fast forward to 2021. Well, first of all, let me just say more about the highly flawed bill, because I think this is important. You guys are going to need to manage your expectations, seriously manage your expectations, because not only are you going to need to focus on the most critical bills and set priorities, but then you're going to have to figure out what you can live with and what you have authority to negotiate. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So in 2021, the Virginia Conservation Network, yet again, some of these guys formed this elite lobby team, and they established key priority bills for 2021. They let everything else go. And they basically said, the only thing we think we can really get that is really big is clean car standards, and attached to that became an EV rebate bill, and I'll explain why. They decided not to try and fix the highly flawed Virginia Clean Economy Act. And I can't even tell you all the ways it's flawed. Yes, it accomplished a lot, but there are serious flaws to it, including simply the definition of what constitutes a renewable. Under the statute, as is currently enacted, renewable can include really bad stuff like methane producing stuff, including biomass and certain types of biomass, pig farms down in Smithfield packing, and things like certain pulp mills that got specifically exempted out. But what was a little different for my working group this year is, for whatever reason, and there are several, we got a seat at a table, and I got to participate in this elite team as the only volunteer. Everybody else is a professional, and I got to kind of watch how the sausage was made, very up close, front and personal. Our Climate and Clean Energy Working Group started lobbying in November very intently. We couldn't lobby earlier than that because we didn't have the substance of the bill. We could only lobby generally. And what I have found is that legislators do want to know more. They want to know, the ones that matter, they're going to need to know details, and will ask questions. Let me talk about the tools that this elite team sort of put together. First of all, they did lobby matching. So for every single legislator we decided to contact, or we needed to contact, and basically it was the entire group, but there were high priority legislators. There was a person, might be Mike Town, who's the executive director of League of Conservation Voters, has a good relationship with Dick Sasslaw. Who knew? But those guys get along well. They're probably the only Green that Dick Sasslaw trusts, and that's because this guy can make deals with Dominion, right? So you got to be able to make deals with your kind of arch enemies to be able to be effective in lobbying some of these very recalcitrant Democratic conservative senators. We had weekly meetings plus, but these weren't just talking meetings. What these meetings were is they were very focused on strategy, and it was a review of who has talked to Sam Russell, who has talked to Dick Sasslaw, what intelligence did we get? What partners do we need to double team? Now that we know where Dick is on this issue, we literally brought in, Mike Town brought in Dominion to talk to Dick Saslaw, because Dick Saslaw was so opposed to clean car standards just as a matter of principle. And Dominion didn't really have a dog in the fight. If anything, clean cars inures to their benefit because it's more electricity. So this team of lobbyists, these professional, well, they're really not professional lobbyists, but these professional public interest people have so much experience lobbying and working with their public enemies that they can bring in their public enemies to be effective lobbyists on our behalf when we need to. It's really a weird world out there. They tracked everything on sort of a professional tracking mechanism called Trello. I'd never used it before. It's fabulous. We developed constantly evolving one-page talking points and deeper sets of talking points. They evolved because as we learned through these weekly meetings, what issues were important to various legislators was evolving through time. We thought we had a bead on what issues were important, but it kept changing. So we had to keep up with our talking points in order to, make them relevant. And one thing I will say about talking points, have a darn good editor. A lot of people are really way too wordy. As an attorney, I'm really trained in writing precisely. So even though I wasn't so substantive on issues, I would get called in and I would edit talking points so that they were really sharp and focused. It was a professional group with the exception, frankly, of me. As I said, they were these high level, they were usually the executive directors of the various groups. We had, the top attorney for Southern Environmental Law Center, who was a transportation expert, had tons of cred. We had one of the top attorneys for NRDC, the top attorney for NRDC in the Virginia chapter, tons of political cred. But we also had professional lobbyists too, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the reason why we had professional lobbyists is we brought in some of our adversaries, our business adversaries, and they had the money to hire professional lobbyists. And then we had somebody in the governor's office that was always participating in our meetings and trying to bring the governor's office on board. So those were some of the tools we used. Now I want to get into this I want to get to a couple points that are really critical, I think. And one is, do you have good negotiating abilities? Frankly, or these are lobbying abilities. Frankly, this is not my strong suit. I'm a trial attorney. I can write a brief. I can make a substantive argument, but that is not what moves legislators. That is just not it. That's logic, right? And the legislators may be moved by entirely different things, which I'm sure you guys are finding out. And so the lobbying ability really is a different skill set than being able to argue facts. You need the facts, but you also need this ability to really get, and I think you guys may be doing this on your deep dives, what is making that person tick and why are they reacting the way they're reacting? And then the second part of that is you need to have authority to negotiate, right? I, as chair of the Climate and Clean Energy Group for the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, have no authority. Like, who am I representing? Nobody, right? Nobody that really has the authority to buy off on this. But Southern Environmental Law Center and the Virginia Conservation Network are going to sign off on whatever Trip Pollard for SCLC negotiates in terms of substantive changes. It'd be a small group that has that ability. And so then you get buy-off from the environmental groups, and you get buy-off hopefully from your industry groups, and you're in a position to negotiate in ways that my group would never be able to have done. So it's very interesting to watch that process. And that's something you guys are going to really have to think about. Who are you negotiating on behalf of? Well, it's kind of the public, right? But the public writ large doesn't move a Janet Howell, and it doesn't move a Dick Saslaw at all. Forget it. So that's something you need to be thinking about. Credibility was a big deal. As I mentioned, we had these heavy hitters who people respected. SELC, NRDC, Nature Conservancy had a woman who was so substantive on these issues. And they had a certain amount of respect and track records with some of these legislators, even if the legislators didn't believe. necessarily in our cause. And again, we co-opted critical business groups, which was for me the most shocking thing. So for me, Dominion's public enemy number one. I can't even imagine figuring out how to co-opt Dominion. And so watching how Mike Town from Virginia League of Conservation Voters can co-opt Dominion and get Dominion to work on our behalf on a clean car standards bill was interesting. And that is also why they didn't even try to amend the Virginia Clean Economy Act, because it was going to be too hard. Dominion was not going to budge on it. And if Dominion wasn't going to budge on it, then our Commerce and Labor Committee members weren't going to budge on it. So that way we were able to use Dominion to our advantage because we weren't in conflict with Dominion. Very interesting dynamic. So we brought on the Virginia Auto Dealers Association, who would have been our Dominion for the clean car standards, and how they did it was kind of fascinating. They offered a very progressive rebate bill, which was David Reed was patroning. And that rebate bill was the hook that brought on the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. They also wanted some infrastructure, which Rip Sullivan was able to find. By the way, Rip Sullivan is the guy who works all these issues behind the scene. We don't get nothing without Rip Sullivan. I can't say enough about how he works behind the scenes on these big issues. And then eventually, we hooked in the Auto Manufacturers Association, which opposed the bill up until the last week. They never came out and said we supported it, but they stopped their opposition. And the way we got the Auto Manufacturers Association is we had this legal team with SELC and NRD, primarily SELC, which made a few minor changes, which didn't require us to sell the shop, so to speak, or sell the farm, and still allowed us to accomplish probably 90% of what we wanted to accomplish in the bill. So these guys start participating in our weekly calls with their lobbyists. So now we've got this very interesting team that includes the people that we thought I would have thought would have opposed no matter what. What was the result? Well, even this, and I'm pointing this out to show you how hard it is to get something decent passed in the General Assembly. There were Democratic holdouts up until the floor vote. We had a call at 6 o'clock the night before the Clean Cars bill was going to the full Senate floor. And we didn't know if we had Marston, for sure. We didn't know if we had Barker. We sure didn't know if we had Linwood Lewis. And there were several others that were holdouts. So we do this frantic, that lobby matching, right? We had to do the lobby matching again the night before, and every single senator was called by somebody. I had to contact Barbara Favola. She was a patron of the bill. I said, Barbara, we need you to make a pitch at the caucus beforehand. And so she did that. Several others made a pitch to the caucus. I think Dick Saslaw, by the way, Dick Saslaw voted against this in committee, which that's its own story in itself. So the bill passes. Everybody's excited. David Reed bill passes, but David Reed bill there was a reconciliation issue that had to come up, and in the last minute, it became an unfunded rebate bill. And there are no clear fingerprints, although people kind of know what happened. But so we get this incredible progressive rebate bill, which was what was the hook to get our business partners on board. And then the Dems unfunded behind closed doors. So there's really no peace in the valley. To this day, our partners are upset. And right now we are working, although I haven't been attending the meetings because I'm taking a bit of a break, we're working with the governor's office to look at funding mechanisms, not for this year, but for next year, to make sure the governor gets on board big time with this, governor staff. And we're starting a new education process on why we have to have rebates in order to really make everything work. So it is a complex process. Things can change right at the last minute when you think you have it all together. And it's because of a handful of really difficult Democrats. Okay, committee members matter. These are your committee members. You guys know who they are, but if you don't get it out of committee, it doesn't go anywhere. And I can look at this and I can tell you who you're going to have, a few of the people you're going to have trouble with on the Democrat side right out of the starting gate, because they're the same people we have trouble with on commerce and labor. And that's Sproul, that's going to be Mason. And Nancy, you've assured me you can get Scott Surville, but I would have given him a big fat question mark. But Sproul and Mason are going to be real problems for you guys. So that's, you're going to really need to focus on these guys first and foremost. These are your people. And if you can get a Republican to break with you, you know, who knows, that would be awesome. Takeaways, establish your goals. As I mentioned early on, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to message this year, or are you trying to be politically realistic? So for example, messaging. We messaged, one of the other bills we picked was building codes. It was a messaging year because we didn't expect to get much accomplished. In fact, we ended up getting more than we expected. And no small, well, that's a separate story. But you've got to think about it. Green New Deal, although the Green New Deal people will not say this, but to some extent, that's a messaging bill. That is not a bill that's going to pass. It wouldn't pass last year. It wasn't going to pass the year before. And unless they rewrite it substantially, it will not pass in 2022. But it is building momentum, and it's talking about the issues. Or do you want to be politically realistic? Pick that one bill that you actually think you can really get through, and you've got it all figured out, how you're going to negotiate the strategy, what your backups are going to be. And go for that. So what are your goals going to be? And then this goes, you know, prioritizing your bills carefully is really, again, goes to that issue. We chose not to do the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We knew we couldn't get it through. We couldn't get the fixes we wanted, and we couldn't co-opt Dominion. On the other hand, I'm going to give you a sort of a sad story. Clean Virginia went after this with tooth and nail, and they had started out with 7 bills. They reduced it to 5 bills. They were all fantastic utility reform bills. They tried an omnibus bill, and that was a Lee Ware Republican and Jay Jones bill. They co-sponsored the bill the year before, probably the only bipartisan bill. And then they broke it down, because there's always the question, do you do an omnibus or do you break it apart? 2 years ago, we tried to, or several years ago, we tried to do some omnibus bills, and people, we tried to do, we had broke apart bills, and the legislature says, oh, you have too many bills. What we need is an omnibus bill. Then you get an omnibus bill, and they go, oh, like the utility reform. We can't possibly do an omnibus bill. You need to break it down. So Clean Virginia did both, and every last blessed bill failed. So I mean it when I say prioritize your bills carefully, because life is short. You know, and you guys are volunteers. Identify your coalition. Who are your members? What are their strengths? What are their capabilities? What are their ties to the legislators? Are they really, you know, like the people that the legislators know have a good track record? That's really important. Have you got relationships with people in critical places in the governor's office? Who are your business partners? Because frankly, the Janet Howells of the world, Dick Saslaws, they don't listen to me. They're not going to listen to Nancy. They will listen to a big business entity. So who are those people? And then the main takeaway I want to say here is your champion has to be really strategic. This is something, really big lesson learned for me. The dream team, the elite team chose Bagby. I would never have chosen Bagby. He's not, he was not very articulate. He really didn't wrap himself around the details of this bill. We had to get him smart after he kind of screwed up on, you know, trying to talk about it in the House. But on the other hand, we knew if we didn't have Bagby, who was chair of the Black Legislative Caucus, we're never going to get Louise Lucas. We're never going to get Lionel Sproul. We're never going to get these people that are just have a visceral we're going to have a visceral reaction against it. And so it turns out that it was very strategic to choose Bagby. You know, had I had my druthers, I would have simply chosen Mark Keene, because this was his bill the year before. Mark is an amazing champion. He cares about the issue dearly, but there was a lot of strategizing going on in who that champion was going to be based on what other legislators that champion could actually convert. I'm going to throw this up there, Nancy, if you want. I can show this really quickly. The Senate, a couple of us from the working group did a analysis of Senate voting records of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition key bills. What we were looking at is not voting on the bills that passed. We didn't care about that because it takes 51 to pass. What we cared about were which bills failed. And so we looked at whether a Democratic senator voted against a bill in subcommittee, committee, or on the floor. And what happened is the bills that failed are not surprising. Good government, which is what I call you guys, climate and clean energy, utility reform, and the key gun bills. Nancy, you want me to just show the final outcome of this? So there you have it. Of the 17 bills that were Virginia Grassroots Coalition priority bills, those were voting records based on the total opportunities and positive votes. I can talk about this more separately, but we don't have a lot of time. But you can see down at the bottom, these are people that will always be troubling: Lionel, George, Louise, Monty Mason, Dave Marston, Linwood Lewis, and Dick Saslaw. So that's all I got for now.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, it was exactly what we needed.
Oh, here are the bills in case you want, and I'll provide this for you guys if you want to. Now I just have to figure out how to stop my share. And there we go.
Yeah. So just because I know you only have like 2 or 3 minutes, and we just
1 minute.
1 minute, yeah. And you and I have talked, and you know about what we're doing on campaign finance, and it's interesting from an advocacy perspective. You sort of got into entry point into this, what are the League of Conservation Voters and stuff like that. When you look at campaign finance, what are the entry points that we have? I mean, Clean Virginia is there, but I mean, in a funny way, Clean Virginia is, I don't know what we've had discussions with Clean Virginia, and maybe they're not like the Sierra Club. They're not like the League of Conservation Voters. How do we professionalize our lobbying on campaign finance?
Well, I think that is your tough question, of course. We were lucky because there was the dream team, and I was lucky enough to get on, participate in that process so I could see it. It's not so clear for you guys. And one thing you might consider, and I'd be happy to set this up, Nancy, is to have a very candid discussion with the two people at the Sierra Club I think could help you the most. One is Bob Shippey, who chairs our legislative committee, the Sierra Club Legislative Committee, and the other is their in-house lobbyist, and Connor Kish, and they're both great. They're both savvy. They know these legislators really well. And I think they may have a lot of ideas for you. And I'd be happy to be part of that call if you think that would be helpful. But that would be a very good place to start. And I think they'd be very, very sympathetic to your issues and spend some time with you guys, especially now that it's not in session, and do it before the new session starts, because they're going to be that special session.
Yeah. And what about, you mentioned Mike Town, who is the League of Conservation.
Mike Town, he's kind of hard to get hold of. I would start with the Sierra Club first. I feel really comfortable there, my colleagues, and that would be a good place to start, and then see what they say. And yes, Mike Town might be a logical person to talk with. Albert Pollard is unbelievable, not to be confused with Skip Pollard. Skip was with SELC. Albert is sort of a former legislator himself. He used to be executive director of Sierra Club. And he currently is head of the Virginia Virginia chapter of the Energy Foundation, but he is moving on to different things. He kind of drove this group. He kind of drove the elite team. And I think it was because he's a former legislator and a very committed environmentalist and really extraordinarily focused individual. He might be willing to spend some time with you too, but start with Sierra Club first because they really are friendly.
And in fact, Bob Shipley is, we've had discussions with him and they signed our unity statement. So,
Yeah.
that would be great. Any other burning questions, John?
We should let her go, right?
Yeah, we got to let her go.
I'm going to cram down a little food before I have my class. So
Well,
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was a great.
it's my pleasure.
great
You guys are
Seeing you
doing,
again, my
it was
friend.
very insightful.
yes, Jeff. You guys
especially-
are doing great work. And if I can help you, although I've taken a step back from a number of things for a few months, I needed a break.
That was very helpful. Very.
Very, very helpful.
So
Thank you.
laugh, though, you say we're doing a great job and we testified and all the bills died.
Well, we're learning.
That's, you know
We're
what?
learning. Hey, we're
That
learning.
is
We're learning.
not, whether a bill passes or fails is not the measure of success, right?